Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest, reacting to some Toronto Raptors news. And that's right, the Toronto Raptors, they are not done making free agency signings. They're still trying to pick up the players and piece this roster together so we don't have another tanking season. And that's right, today we've had a Woj bomb, and we got a new updated segment for it. Let me know what you think of the animation. But the Toronto Raptors are signing Svi Mykhailiuk to a 2-year contract. So he's getting on this roster. I'm assuming it's at the minimum. The details of the contract haven't officially been released, but this is an interesting pickup. Nothing to really blow your minds as a Toronto Raptors fan, but definitely is a player that I think has the potential to be a rotation piece right away going into this season. And looking at his sort of tangibles, he's a guy that's 6'7", 24 years old, played for the LA Lakers, the Detroit Pistons, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, was traded from Detroit to Oklahoma City this season, had a monster game against the Toronto Raptors if you guys were watching at the end of last year, so maybe some people are familiar with his game, but he's a guy that really does everything well, if that makes sense. He's on the offensive end. He's not a bad defender. He has really good hands in terms of poking the basketball. He can shoot the three, which is a big topic of discussion surrounding his potential and this, that, and whatever. We'll dive into that as this video goes along. And he's surprisingly a strong finisher around the rim from everything I've seen in highlights and people talking, Pistons fans, OKC fans talking about his game. So those are all encouraging factors playing into the part of him getting added to this roster. And now, obviously, the first thing that we have to talk about is, could he be a rotation player for this Toronto Raptors team? And Isaac Bonga is a guy that we've signed recently at this time of year where Riker and I said, okay, he's a young guy. He's a couple years younger than Svi, but I think he's a G Leaguer. I think he's a guy that we're looking to develop, see if he can work out maybe in a couple years in this Toronto Raptors development staff. And yes, even though Svi's younger, played on not the greatest of teams in the past. I know he was drafted by the Lakers, but that was before they were real nice and were winning championships and such. But he's a guy that has a lot of potential and a lot of just game-ready ability. So, you know, the big thing we got to talk about, we'll look at his stats. If you particularly look at his 2019-2020 season, those are some pretty encouraging numbers, shooting close to 40% from the three-point line, around 8 points per game, 9 points per game. So he's a player for all the things I mentioned. He can get you buckets on the offensive end and not be a liability on defense. So for the Toronto Raptors, who seemingly have a little bit of a hole in terms of the backup shooting guard's position, specifically if we do lose Goran Dragic, right, or lose him, trade him away for Moses Brown, which is the thing that people are saying is gonna happen. We're not sure until it actually falls through on October 1st or whenever it's supposed to occur. But if we lose a Goran Dragic, who Riker and I are high on potentially being a decent scoring backup to give us some veteran leadership, and when we have our young guns of Malachi Flynn, Scotty Barnes, our bench, whoever's going to be out there, Gary Trent, you know, the young guys are out there. Having a scoring presence off the bench is going to be essential. But if we're losing Dragic, which is very well possible, he has higher ambitions of the Dallas Mavericks. We'll see what ends up happening in that case. Then we're really relying upon Ishmael Wainwright, who, yes, we think is a tremendous defender, can lock some guys up, can do this, that, and whatever. We think he has the potential, but still is an unproven quantity in the NBA. Right, so it's tough to really bank on that guy being a backup shooting guard right away into the league, as he is in his first actual season in the NBA, and he did have a promising summer league, but was up and down even in that small sample size. So I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a sold surefire thing on Ishmael being that backup too. Scotty Barnes, I think, will mostly play in the forward-ish positions. You know, maybe he'll be the backup shooting guard. Maybe he'll start at the 2. We don't really know where Scotty Barnes is going to be positioned at this point. But then you're really looking at the Champagnes of the world. Maybe Utah gets moved down a peg in terms of positioning, get him to play the backup 2. But after losing Bembry, after losing Stanley Johnson, which we assume he's not coming back, maybe he will inevitably at some point. Right, obviously Kyle Lowry, he was one of your guards that you could play him and Fred on and off the ball. And I'm forgetting one guy that Paul Watson Jr. How could I forget the guy that killed it in the bubble in those couple of games? Right, we're losing a lot of shooting guard depth. So if you're not absolutely sold on Ishmael, I think Svi Mykhailiuk could really be a guy that, especially starting off the season, could be a rotation piece for this Toronto Raptors team. Now, that might be a little bit of a hot take because, or to some people hearing it, because Svi is not necessarily the most highly touted guy in the NBA by any means. He's been traded from bottom feeder to bottom feeder, but there is a lot of potential there. And as I brought up his stats earlier, 40% from three a couple seasons ago, a guy that can finish around the rim, you can always count on those guys being positives. However, in his second season, or his third season of his career, fell off a little bit, specifically from behind the three-point line. His 40% three-point shooting fell to just 33%, and who knows, maybe it's just because of the weird COVID year, and the Pistons certainly were in the bubble, neither were the Oklahoma City Thunder, so there wasn't necessarily that factor coming into play, but definitely just a weird season. I know shooters, when there isn't fans to hype them up, it can be a tough situation to sort of knock those shots down. Maybe I'm just giving this guy excuses, but that's the one area. If he's not able to shoot the basketball, that's his main real positive attribute. You see why the Oklahoma City Thunder may have given up on a guy at this young of age, let him walk in free agency. They cut his qualifying offer, and Thunder fans, they were a mixed bag of reactions when I creeped their subreddit and seeing what they thought of this guy. Some were saying they expected him to get a 3-year, $20 million a year contract. It puts him at $7 million per year, which would be an average bench shooter in this league with a lot of potential and this, that, and whatever. And they were shocked to see him leave. They were confused why the Thunder let him, cut that qualifying offer, let him walk. While others were saying, yes, it makes sense. He's a high character guy, but didn't really have a fit, didn't really have a need in that team with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I see both sides of the argument. I see that there's no true consensus on what player he can eventually amount to become, but for the Toronto Raptors that are sort of piecing things together, throwing a lot of players at the wall, I think his potential upside, it's not the upside of a long, wiry, athletic wing player with a 7-foot wingspan that could be a remarkable defender. He's not going to be that. But I think his floor is a lot higher than many of the players that we brought in this offseason. So that's one thing you have to sort of take into consideration when you're bringing in guys, when you have high-risk projects that you probably are going to have to play consistent minutes throughout a season. And we're not trying to rebuild. We're trying to be right back in the playoff picture. We still have Siakam, we still have Fred, we still have OG. 3 of those guys want to win. And Trent, even though he's not a veteran, he's definitely a guy that wants to get those W's, wants to get those big games, obviously hitting game winners. Was it against the Oklahoma City Thunder? Maybe not. He hit a game winner in one of those games, but Svi, right, he's a guy that is less of a risk than these sorts of players. And if he can get his 3-point shooting percentage back to that 40% range, that's a huge positive. And even with his down season last year, the one thing that they brought up, a lot of the OKC fans and the teams that had him on the roster, I'll pull the stats back up on the screen here. He was not afraid to fire away at that basketball. He wasn't afraid to shoot that rock, let it fly from deep. If you look at his stats, he's shooting 5 threes a game. So obviously he has no hesitation. He's willing to let it fly. People in his first couple games with the Detroit Pistons, following the trade from the Detroit Pistons, the OKC Thunder fans were comparing him to LeBron James, his ability to pass, shoot, all these sorts of things, do everything on the court. Obviously the hype died down a bit. There were also some considerations that, from my research, from what people are saying, these are the Reddit sources, so don't take them too seriously, but apparently kind of backed off a little bit when the season was just completely a write-off for Oklahoma City, which it makes sense. They were the optimized tanking team last year, and I guess he's playing for a contract, and it's surprising that he kind of take his foot off the gas in a regular season, but some people said just in that environment, the losing sort of culture they had last season in OKC, it was a tough thing to play in, and Svi just wasn't really engaged out there on the basketball court. So those are all things that you have to take into consideration when you're bringing in a guy like that, looking at his past performance, looking that he was in a down year, playing for probably the 2 worst teams in the NBA last season. So it's it's taken his poor drop off his shooting. That's a fact that has to be factored in when looking at stats. So if you're asking me for my predictions, what's going to happen? I think if we keep Goran Dragic, Svi's going to be pushed to the back burner. He's not going to get that many minutes. He's not going to get that many opportunities. However, I think starting the year, assuming Goran Dragic is traded, moved on to Dallas, we get a big man or non-shooting guard back in return, I could really see him starting off that season with those backup 2 minutes, because he's not a tremendous defender by any means. He's not going to be locking up whoever he's guarding, but he's still solid there on that defensive end, which is a necessity if you want to get out there on the court. He's not a Matt Thomas who just couldn't play defense, right? That's why he ended up getting traded, waived, despite the fact he was Mr. 99%, even though it was Mr. 17% last season. Svi, he's not going to be that bad on defense. At least he hasn't shown that poor defensive prowess in the past. But the offensive end is where I think he's a little bit above guys like Wainwright, Champagnie, our two-way players, and Isaac Bonga as well, who I think is going to spend a lot of time in the G League. I think he's above those guys. So that's where I think he'll be starting off the season. Obviously Wainwright, I'm very high on, potentially the next PJ Tucker, right? Develops, get him some more reps with the Toronto Raptors team. Could see him potentially overtaking him because he has a higher ceiling, but I don't know. It's going to be an interesting pickup, a low risk, high reward pickup in my opinion. Just having those role players that have the potential to shoot, always a plus. And I also forgot one thing. The second year on this contract is a player option, so we could be having him for a 2-year season. I think that's a positive. We'll see what the money is specifically, but let me know what you guys think of this Svi Mykhailiuk pickup. Do you think he's going to be the savior, the three-point sniper, the guy that's off the bench that's the missing piece, or will he be pushed to the end of the bench and guys like Wainwright, Champagnie, whoever is going to overtake him? Let me know in the comment section below. You're the best to make this far. Check out the Instagram, the TikTok, all that cool stuff. Anyways, I'm signing off. Cheers.